are a learner-centered instructional design company. And we love learning. We love creating a community of learning. And then we love thinking about new ideas. So this is kind of our chance to bring all those things together. So thank you for joining our community and being here with us today. We host an inspiration hour on the first Thursday of every month. So feel free to join us again in the future. We'd love to have you back. And some of our past inspiration hours have included Maria Scalepi, and she made a new friend every day for a year. And so she shared with us what that taught her about belonging and how that relates to company culture. And then we also recently heard from Katie Krummick, and she shared about a toolkit that she helped create for teachers that allows them to be the designers of their own classrooms. And we have these all stored in a file. We record these. So I'll send a link out so you can check out any of our past inspiration hours if you're interested in those. And then next month, we'll be hearing from Christian Long, and he is the Chief Growth Officer at Think Learning Studio. And he'll be talking about setting the stage for aha moments. And that will be on Thursday, April 6th at 11 a.m. Like I said, I'll share some links in the chat right after this so you can see some of the things that we have and maybe sign up for any lists that you're interested in. And also with the chat, feel free to drop comments or questions as Kate gets going, and then we'll address those in the last 15 minutes or so of today's inspiration hour. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Erin Huizenga, our CEO of Desklight. But before I do, I wanted to give a quick plug for Erin's book. She is releasing a book this month. It's called Learning in the Wild, and we're so excited about it. She shares in it 21 actionable ways for people to become a learning leader and to make learning a daily part of their lives. And it's so awesome. Highly recommend it. And that's really on 12th. It's on Amazon, so be sure to check that out. Okay, over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
Kate, I love to do intros a little bit unconventionally in our Desklight inspiration hours because it's fun to share with everybody how we all got here and share with our team how we met. So Kate, when I was doing the math this morning, thinking, I think we've known each other for over a decade, perhaps 15 years or so, from when we originally met through Carol McCarthy, which is kind of fun to think about. And
that's right.
Yeah, it goes way back. It's fun.
Works for good.
Yeah, and I think we sat down for lunch when, of course, you were at the executive director at the Chicago network, and I've just always appreciated just such a connector that you are. You are one of my favorite people as it relates to connecting and being so thoughtful and empathetic about what women in Chicago really need and making those connections either in the short term or the long term. So I've always appreciated that about you. And I know so many people in the city really appreciate that about you. So with that, Kate has been chair of the University of Chicago Women's Board, and she's currently a trustee at New Music USA, just to name a few of the board positions that she's held over many, many years. And she's going to be sharing today about how education opportunities can be used as real value drivers for members, member associations, member organizations. And so, Kate, with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that warm and gracious introduction. So you can't really see, but I'm wearing my University of Chicago Graham School top because I am a lifelong learner and I love that this is your focus. So I feel very privileged and honored to be asked to speak with you today. As I was thinking about this topic, felt like I was floating around in generalities. And then I realized I've got a great case study for you that I think gets down to the real kernel, the real essence. So my dear friend, Margaret Mueller, Erin, I'm going to connect you with her, took over leadership of the Executives Club of Chicago pre-COVID. And so, as you probably know, Chicago is like one of the mega centers for associations in the United States. And there's a whole variety. Some are exclusive, some are open to everybody, some are industry focused. And now we've got the entry of for-profit ventures like Chief and Bonfire, which are focused on women into the market. So there's a crowded market. Everybody wants your attention. Everybody wants your membership dollars. And then, of course, COVID upended everything we knew. So how should you think about these organizations, whether they're clients or whether they're organizations that you're looking to join or serve on the board of? And I think the Executives Club provides just a fabulous framework for thinking about education as a value driver. It has brilliantly transformed itself from really a meh organization, to be quite candid. Margaret would admit that, to an organization with a very distinct value proposition, and coupled with educational programming, leadership development, firmly grounded in purpose. So I think purpose should be driving all of us, but it is equally true of organizations and associations. As Margaret describes it, before COVID, if you looked at organizations in a pyramid form, the Executives Club would have been at the bottom, open to everybody, programs like everybody else. And then above it would be like the Economic Club and the Chicago Network. And at the very pinnacle is the Commercial Club, which is like the most exclusive business organization in the city. So what would happen is that as a member who had, longtime member of the Executives Club started to move up the ladder, they're like, well, I have graduated from the Executives Club and I'm going to resign. I don't need you anymore. And so during COVID, Margaret brilliantly reconceived the membership and grew the top and bottom lines. What she did is, of course, her homework, because COVID was a big panic moment, right? Are you going to have your sponsorships to support your programming? Are members going to keep paying their dues when everything is locked down? And so she really approached this 100-plus-year-old organization, as a startup and an organization in a turnaround. And so the analogy that Margaret uses is like, when you renovate a house, you're going to go all out. You're going to strip it down to the studs. And that's really what they did with the Executives Club. And so they really focused on what could they create today, putting aside everything they've done for the last 100 years. And so instead of a pyramid, Margaret really reconceived the Executives Club as a big, all-inclusive circle, open to everybody, to the C-suite, to up-and-comers and the general public. So what she did for these folks who said, well, now I'm a member of the Economic Club, I don't need to belong to the Executives Club, she really flipped the conversation. And she says, yeah, how good for you. You're a member of these organizations, but what are you doing for your teams? And so what she did was created an enterprise membership model. And so executives would sign up their organizations as sponsors to make all these benefits available to their teams. Pre-COVID, they had been offering, all kinds of leadership development programs. I participated as a mentor, but there was nothing really particularly distinctive about what they were doing. So they acquired HRMAC, which is the HR Management Association of Chicago. And so now all their leadership development training and education, as well as mentoring, is led by HR professionals. So it gives the Executives Club and their programming kind of a seal of approval that they lacked beforehand. They also recognized through surveys and focus groups that what people wanted is nobody really wants to go to a hotel ballroom with 1,000 people anymore. It's very transactional. You don't really, you might or might not know the people at your table. They might not be someone that you really are going to get value from connecting with. And so they've started to focus on smaller, unique experiences. And so they do things like intimate conversations with CEOs, AMAs, sharing leadership journeys. They also just, doubled the size of their board, which is really interesting strategically, because before it was always big bang, public company CEOs. And now they've got a much broader base of inclusivity and recognizing that leadership comes, from all different kinds of organizations. They also articulated their mission very quickly as to connect and grow Chicago's business leaders. And so I love that whole feeling of inclusivity. They used to have industry focus groups, which were frankly not very successful. And now they've replaced them with summits such as technology and other things. And every one of them has sold out since the beginning of the year when they launched the program. And so in terms of leadership development, they've been very, very focused on different tiers. So they have leadership circles, which are peer development groups, very carefully choosing participants. They have something called LEAD for high potentials, which is leadership, engagement, assessment, and development. So again, the value proposition is we can really, we can train your people more cost effectively than you ever can. And so, this is sort of what you're doing also through your wonderful work. But it's such a clear value proposition, and it keeps the CEOs involved because now they're focused on developing their teams. They also have executive women's mentoring, and they've partnered with one of those for-profits, Bonfire, Suzanne Mushin's group. And that is something that enables companies to work with Bonfire through the Executives Club to do custom leadership development for women, because they can't really staff-wise be all things to all people. So again, very strategic, either acquisitions or partnerships. The other thing they did was really operate from a spirit of generosity. During COVID, every single program they did was free and open to anyone who wanted to join. And it turned out to be like a really smart sampling strategy, right? So that people from all walks of life could really start to hone in on, well, who are these people and what do they do? And that ended up being a driver of membership. So here they are. They have doubled their reserves. They've grown the top line. They've grown the bottom line. And I would say that the high level takeaways are really lean into purpose and bring joy to all you do. And to me, that was just the clearest case in point. And, some of the other organizations I belong to have not been as nimble. And they're really more about connecting than educating, but they haven't let go of the old models. It's still back to the ballroom with 1,000 people getting dressed up when no one really feels like dressing up anymore. And it's really interesting. So, and I dearly love the Economic Club, but they're getting the same speakers as the Executives Club like a year later. So it's been really quite a transformation. So those are really kind of my takeaways is professional organizations and associations really think about how they're going to deliver value. I think with associations, as with the nonprofit world, there are too many of them doing sort of the same thing. And I think what Margaret's been able to do is really distinguish her organization and focus on inclusivity instead of exclusivity, and therefore, thereby just transformed it into this incredible juggernaut. And that's what happens when you get an entrepreneur to lead an association.
Yes, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love what you're saying about professional associations not quite getting it in terms of, they shouldn't be hosting these huge events as much as they used to, because people just aren't uptaking them like they used to. And, I think about it like they're missing the boat, kind of like some of the K-12, public education folks are missing the boat. Professional associations are missing the boat in some of this change that needs to happen. And so I appreciate that a lot. And we have been working with many associations lately to help them sort of crack the code on what they can and should be doing. So I wonder, with
now, I want to say one thing, because the Economic Club actually has done some pivoting in a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
They now have things called member exchanges, which are kind of self-produced content. I wouldn't say necessarily highly targeted education, but there are opportunities to gather in small groups and learn. And those have been enormously successful, and I think is a really nice counterpoint to the large gatherings that they continue to hold. So I want to give them good props for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have one more question, then I'd love to just have everybody ask questions also, and just kind of popcorn around. But I'm curious, you talked about the sort of freemium model, especially during the pandemic and perhaps a little after the pandemic. I'm curious on your kind of holistic thoughts on how that can work as a strategy for professional associations. How much is freemium first, and then how do you level up into more of a premium offering or a subscription offering, and all of the different kinds of things that folks might dream up?
I really think that COVID was unique, and you could do the freemium and build it to the premium because people were able to see the value proposition. I think it's more challenging to offer things free, although all these organizations, the Executives Club is in the process of becoming a C3. The network became a C3. The Economic Club became a C3. Part of what you demonstrate to the IRS is that, in the case of associations, it's usually that you're an educational organization. So what's happening is, while you may not be able to attend an event for free if you're not a member, they will then post that event. They'll record it like we're recording today and post it on the web so that anyone can take advantage. So I think that's a way to do it that allows sampling that can lead to greater engagement. The other thing I wanted to mention is that these summits that the Executives Club is doing, they allow people to network sort of cross industry, and they're offered free to members. And so again, there is that really significant value proposition.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, I wonder if you're talking about LC3s, and I think it's a really interesting model, not to get in the weeds on that too much, but I wonder if you could describe that as a model, because I know a few folks might find that very, very interesting.
Now, you have to be a particular, you're really not putting yourself forth as an association, but what's really interesting, since we went through it, is you can be exclusive and still be a C3, as long as you're making content generally available. So under the Internal Revenue Code, and this is like my former lawyer hat coming on, so I will try not to be hyper technical, but if you're a charitable organization, you don't pay taxes on your income. So, but traditional associations that are very membership focused tend to be C6s. And so actually the network was a C7 when I started, which was a huge mistake, because if you're a C7, you can only get a small portion of your income from outsiders. Most of it has to come from your members. And then as we grew our Women in the Forefront lunch, we lost our tax exempt status because we had, I was like all about growing the top line, right? But that's what led us to go get C3 status. So it's not available to your garden variety medical association, but if it's sort of a more general membership group that's focused on leadership and development, and can position itself as an educational organization, then there's a chance you'd be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting model as more and more organizations are talking about earned income versus for-profit versus nonprofit charitable status. It's an interesting hybrid. So yeah. And
I still don't know how I feel about sort of the for-profits, the bonfires and the chiefs, because I think there's a common misunderstanding that you can't pay yourself if it's a nonprofit. You can pay yourself. You can pay yourself well. And so there was a woman who came into town many years ago to do a series of leadership conferences. She's from the South. And, every time I spoke to her, I'm like, Elizabeth, you will not thrive long-term because you're for-profit. And she could just never get it. And sure enough, in the beginning, she had Discover and all these sponsors, and then boom, it all dried up and she had to close up shop. Here in Chicago in particular, that nonprofit status, and associations are nonprofit, they just may not be able to be tax exempt, but they are philosophically and legally nonprofits. That is such a strong identifier in Chicago that it'll be very interesting to see how the bonfires do long term.
Yeah. Ellen, you had a question?
Yeah, I was actually in the first cohort of Bonfire when they first launched. And I've been working as a small group leader for a little bit, but it's such a interesting, I wonder about the thing that I found most valuable about Bonfire in the first cohort was this cross-pollination and being able to speak to women from different industries and learn about how you kind of solve challenges that are analogous but not like identical. And I thought that was just extraordinary, but there wasn't a ton of time dedicated to that within the program. They were really leading with content. And I'm wondering like how you feel about the content focus and the time it takes to develop sort of content, and then the value of this kind of like interaction between people, and like how organizations balance that, because I think they need to develop all this content for credibility when people, in my experience, like really want to connect as the value there around some learning. And I'm curious how you think about that.
I absolutely agree. People want to connect around learning. People don't necessarily want to get an MBA or a master's, but they do want to connect and learn, and they want to meet people from other industries. And, I guess as I think more about it, there should be room in the swimming pool or the ocean for the bonfires, the chiefs, and the nonprofit associations, because we've got a population that needs to be served, and not everybody wants the same thing. But having the tools to develop that content, that takes a lot of internal resources, and you have to be able to, sort of get paid back by engaging companies who are willing to pay for that content.
Yeah. There's also like an interesting thing around the cross-pollination. When I was first in it, there would seem to be like a lot of people from different places. But when I came back as a small group leader, because of the way like the funding works, like it's a lot of people from BMO and just like a ton of people from the same place because of the enterprise model that they're working with or how they recruit people. And so, yeah, to your point about like the revenue and how that operates and how it impacts the learning experience of the people in the cohort, because they're all from the same place, and like how does that change the dynamic of the experience? I think is really interesting.
You bring up such a good point, because I've actually heard from some women, and I can't remember whether it was BMO or another institution, that they're not as comfortable when their work cohort is in the room. They're not going to be as vulnerable. They're not going to say, I'm having this challenge, I could really use your advice. I think that's a really interesting conundrum.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the chiefs and the bonfires are curious to me too. I'm curious to see how it plays out, for sure.
So, Erin, just to turn the tables, as you think about doing learning for clients, what do you think about that? Everybody in the room from the same organization?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's even tricky with, with research on a real tactical level, right? Just wondering, how much of the time should the client team be in the research versus not. I think it's the same with any learning experience that's more of an L&D function within a business organization. It's, how often do they lean into each other? And then the benefit of maybe not, being recognized as part of your company or organization at all, and being sort of anonymous, as a person that's coming in to a room just to learn and connect with other humans from wherever they might be, so yeah, we think about that a lot, and there's definitely pros and cons, especially as it relates to, is there a business objective or org objective that the the higher ups sort of need and want to achieve, then of course it makes sense to sponsor that. But maybe people only be, 80% really authentic in those meetings, if that. And but it has to be within that circle if that's something that's coming, as a systemic objective. But yeah, I definitely think people, and I'm curious to hear what everybody thinks too, personally that's here today, I think people are generally more honest, unless they're at a really sweet company that, is very much all about, transparency and honesty at all levels. I think they are ultimately going to be more honest with groups outside of their business or org that are, support groups or small groups in some way.
But maybe it also comes down to whether leadership at the top is showing some vulnerability.
Exactly.
Which then opens up, the channels for, people on who are up and comers to also be vulnerable. And I think the senior leadership team really sets the bar for that.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, just that spirit of being a learner at every level. If the leadership is showing that they care about learning and that they're humbly open to sharing what they're learning, whether it's like learning how to play the piano or learning how to be a better leader. Yeah, that to your point, yeah, just being vulnerable in that, I think it goes a long way.
I think if you reflect upon talks by senior leaders, the ones who tell a story of, something cringeworthy that they did and how they learned from it,
Yes.
those are the speakers you remember. I remember the head of, it wasn't Schwab, but it was, an organization like that, talking about in college, he was at the top of his class, he was going to be number one. And he went into this class to take like probably his second to last final, and it was a math class. So there's usually a piece of paper with a bunch of questions on it, and there is a blank sheet of paper on the desk, everybody's desk. And the professor said, there's only one question today. What is the name of the janitor who cleans this room every night?
Mm-hmm.
And of course he didn't know, he didn't become first in his class, but it forever changed his outlook on people. But to actually stand up and tell that story, I'm not sure how many of us would be willing to do that, but I think that's what sets apart a great leader. Is here's when it didn't go well, or here's when I really screwed up, and here's what I learned, and it's just completely affected me as a leader.
I love that story. That's such a good story, just as a reminder, to be mindful about all of those things. Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of the stories of, CEOs that walk up and down the hall and they talk to everybody, open door policy, but even further than that, like, let's just hang out, let's go have a coffee, and, just establishing that culture really early on with new employees too. Like there's no walls here. There's no hierarchy that's artificial. Like we're all humans. We're all trying to do this thing together.
Yeah. And to be invested. So, another person I heard, this is before he had a stroke, was Dan Gilbert from Rocket Mortgage. And he and the other senior leaders would train a new group of employees about every 6 weeks. And he spent like 8 hours with them, making sure that everybody was inculcated in the cultures and value of the company. And I thought, that's just so powerful. That's why your company does really well, except for now with rising interest rates. But it was just, a very powerful lesson in humility, accessibility, but also the importance of culture.
Yeah, love that. Yeah,
I love.
see. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I love your point about like entrepreneurs kind of leading these spaces, and I think through Graham School, Seth Green was one of my first mentors in life.
I love
yes.
Seth. We just had a meeting yesterday. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, and he's like an entrepreneur at heart and goes into these bigger places, and it really like, and Erin and I have been talking about this internally, that associations in these kind of spaces can be like extraordinary incubators of leading learning, because they're not, that is their, well, learning is a huge value and benefit, and that is their whole game. Like they can be agile if they can figure out how. And I just I wish more leaders, entrepreneurial leaders, were incentivized to go into these spaces, because it can just drive so much value across communities. So I love that point. And I had another question. That wasn't really a question. I had another question about, oh, now it's escaping me. But yeah, I just love the idea of entrepreneurial leaders going into spaces that are historically maybe kind of siloed and stodgy, because it's just unlocking so much value.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question for you, Kate. We talk about, the sort of moving away from the stereotypical professional association activities or networking events and things like that, and then moving into more of a products and services focus for not just members, but for whomever might think they could get benefit from something some professional association might offer, right? So I think it's kind of fun these days to think about tinkering. Like I was mentoring a woman last week, and we were talking about how she really wants to get smart around communication design and network more with more people. And I said, well, join AIGA for a year or two. I mean, you don't have to join for your whole life, join just for a little bit, and then figure out what you're trying to get sharp on and join that members association later on. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on that in terms of, productizing the offerings within some of these professional associations so that they're more accessible and interesting to people that are riffing and sort of traveling through to learn as they grow.
I think that's a really great point. And I think it depends on what kind of association you are, but there are so many focused associations. And I had never really thought about sampling with associations in the same way that people do stacked credentialing for their careers. Do, stacked association learning for their careers. It would be great if there was just an easy way to find out what all the associations are that are focused on, your particular area of interest at the time.
Yeah, I get excited about that. And I think that's a good why for associations to further and further bottle up their offerings. Like we just worked with an events management, event planning association to help them develop micro courses. And I get excited about that for the members, but also for non-members. Like a lot of people could benefit from these micro courses as pure learning, whether they're an event planner or not, Yeah.
I think that's really exciting because I think there is a real joy in learning, just even for the sake of learning, not necessarily career development. And then you look at like LinkedIn, right? They're always bombarding me with courses, which I have no interest in taking, but but they're also in the education space. It seems like everybody wants to be in that space.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I wonder if we might pivot for a few minutes into, all of us on the call right now are women leaders in pretty magnificent ways. And, Kate, you've had such a magnitude of experience within boards and, going into board positions and really making a difference on these boards and working with staff to make changes happen. And just the idea of fiduciary responsibility. The board actually can hire and fire the executive director. Interesting. Many people don't know that. And so anyway, I'm just, what's that?
That's their primary job.
That's right.
The CEO.
That's right. So I wonder if you could speak about your experience. And I know for some people, especially, people kind of moving up career-wise, like when is the right time to join a board? And when do you know what impact you can make and what should kind of going into that world?
Sure. I mean, I think, first and foremost, you are, when you join a governing board, you're a fiduciary. And so you have to approach it with a seriousness of purpose and give it the time and attention it deserves. But I would say it's really never too early to join a board. And one of the great ways to kind of get noticed is to really, peel back the layers on your passion areas, whether it's education or children or animals or health, and really try to narrow it down and then figure out what organizations are in your field. You probably can't cold call them and say, gee, I'd love to join your board, but you can volunteer, join a committee, roll up your sleeves, let them see who you are and what you could bring to the party. And that's a great pathway into a board. And it also gives you a chance to kick the tires on the organization and the staff and to see whether you think there's a good fit there. I would say fit's really important. Due diligence is hugely important. Make sure you understand how the organization is doing financially, because you probably, particularly with an early board, don't want to step into a turnaround situation or one where there's a leadership crisis. You can go, there's a site called GuideStar. Does everybody know about GuideStar? No? Okay, so you join it for free, and each nonprofit has to file a tax return called a 990, and you can go look at the 990s, and you'll get a sense of, where are the revenues going from year to year? Is the board changing over a lot? Have they changed their mission and focus? And it's not a perfect snapshot, but it's a good one. The only thing to keep in mind is that it's delayed. So, you're looking at old, not up-to-date current information, but also organizations that are really transparent post annual reports on their website. And you get a chance to see how they're doing there. And they're often much more fun to read because it's not just the numbers, it's also the mission and how are they fulfilling their mission and how are they engaging volunteers and all the other things that are really essential to a vibrant nonprofit. But never too early.
What do you think is the biggest impact that people can make from joining a board? Like what's your why? What has been your why for joining all of these boards over the years?
Well, besides a passion, it's the opportunity to learn,
Mm,
to really learn from other board members and to learn from the organization's experiences.
mhm,
I've always found it really rewarding. Early on, I tend to make the same mistakes that most people make, and that is get flattered because you've been asked, jump in, and then you're like, oh, maybe this wasn't the best idea, but I've got to give it a couple of years. You don't just, join and then boomerang out of a board. And so that's been a really good learning experience about the importance of due diligence. But I have always learned so much. And, often there'll be an issue and I'll go into the board meeting with, a mindset about this is how it should come out. And then you listen to everybody around the table. And a lot of times I'll come out 180, 180 degrees different than I walked in. So I find it one of the most rewarding things to do.
I love that. Yeah. Wow. What do you think is the most appropriate board term? You hear about 4 or 5 year terms sometimes. It's like, oh my gosh, like is that appropriate or what do you think?
If you garden at all, you should be planting in odd numbers.
Mm,
And I believe that, I like 2-3 year terms. 3 years, you get a chance to really reflect, do I want to do this again? And after 6, it's time for new blood. But you do need some period of time because it's going to take you a while to get up to speed on the organization, figure out where you want to plug in, where can you add value. And over time, you can decide whether you want to develop a specialty. So mine is governance. And I've just been doing it for decades, and it's a lot of fun, and I find it rewarding. But now there are all these new areas. There is cyber, there is ESG. There are all kinds of ways in which you can, by devoting yourself to certain activities on your nonprofits, really develop an expertise, which will make you attractive as you seek out your next nonprofit.
yeah.
And understand, is this a fundraising board? What's your give or get? What are they expecting of you? And are you really comfortable taking that leap?
Mm-hmm. I love that you're pointing to the technologist or the cyber, and the different paths in and the expertise that's needed for many boards these days, because I think it's similar. My husband and I were talking about, big tech layoffs and what big tech loses these, smaller mid-sized businesses and organizations gain because they need the technologists and the futurists that and the experience that they've gotten from these bigger tech companies. And so I think it's true for boards too. So I love that you're pointing to that.
Yeah, and also boards need expertise in digital. Everybody wants a chief development officer, to come in and volunteer their time, but that's really hard to get. Marketing is really hard to get. Those are, I think, areas where boards really could use some help in the nonprofit sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Digital is huge for nonprofits. Look at some of the national nonprofits; they're very sophisticated, and having that expertise on the board would be of immeasurable help.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So I would love to learn a little bit more about who's here.
I have a quick question, just
Sure.
while we're on the topic of boards, just in terms of like proximity, like how much does that matter in terms of board participation? So for example, if I live in New York City and I'm interested in a board based in Maryland, is that an externality I need to closely consider, or are there already metrics in place that are sort of known as best practices or heuristics that all boards are using now?
I would say while a lot of boards are locally focused, I think follow your passion and the organization, recognizing that you will have to pay to get yourself there and pay for the hotel and all that good stuff. But I'm on a board in New York for that reason. I am passionate about new music and love the minds of the creators. But I'm also willing to foot that bill and use my Marriott Bonvoy credit card. So hopefully I have enough points when I go to New York. But I don't think geography should stop you. And, one of the things for New Music USA is we are trying to build our presence in different markets in the country in terms of granting. developing, financial support to make grants to music creators in those regions. And so it's really important for us to have directors from all over the place. And so I think, especially with COVID and Zoom, although I'm a firm believer of getting together in person whenever possible, but by the same token, being virtual gives you a chance to plug in to an organization that may not be based in New York City.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, we could go around the Zoom room here and everybody could kind of introduce themselves to Kate and talk a little bit about who you are, what you do. If everybody's okay with that, that'd be fun.
So I'm going to start with Sarah, who I've been corresponding with. I'll just popcorn around the room. I would love to know more about you.
Yes, I am Sarah. This world of associations is kind of new to me. I just started picking up my career back up after having 4 kids. So I have 4 boys. So I am new to the career world. So this is all really exciting and interesting for me to hear and learn about. And yeah, I've been working with Erin at Desklight for a year as the office manager and love the work they're doing, and I'm learning a ton there.
Okay, how old are your boys? I have to know.
My oldest is 12 and my youngest is 5. So they're all in school now. I was like, I can live my own life a little bit, like be my own person again. So yeah, it's been fun to
really,
feel that.
you've got this personality of calmness. So I think even if there's chaos going on, very zen-like about it, which is a great thing to bring to the
people
party.
tell me that, and I think it's just like default mechanism when you have, all the boys around, like you got to just keep your cool. That's the only way to survive.
Yep. Cassina, did I pronounce that correctly?
You did, yes. So I'm the account manager at Desklight, and I come from primarily like a project management background. So a lot of the spaces that I've been in are luxury brands or like smaller tech startups, a few nonprofits. I've worked at the Center for Community Service and Justice in Maryland and BMW North America for a period of time. And so I love being at Desklight because I get to kind of marry my love for like organization and being like type A with projects, but also getting to do things like this, which aren't always an option as a PM, like having organic conversations with people that honestly, for me, allows me to be a bit more, I don't know, like shake things up and challenge myself in spaces where normally I'm silent or on mute. And so I love that and this conversation about associations, because as I think through, what I or my friends or my peers in other spaces, like what our career path looks like, this conversation about associations is really important because it kind of gives us the opportunity to have like long-term skin in the game, depending upon what organization or industry or niche we want to align with. And so I'm just glad that we get to talk this through. And I wrote down a couple of different post-it notes that are scattered around my desk. So I'm excited to share that with them.
Great. And I love that you had your foot in the nonprofit and the for-profit world. And I think you probably bring just a wonderful multiplicity of experiences and perspectives to what you do. It's pretty fabulous.
She really does. You nailed that, Kate. She really does. It's awesome. Mm-hmm.
Ellen?
Yeah, I'm Ellen. I'm the director of learning design here at Desklight. And I've been working in kind of education nonprofit in Chicago for over a decade before Desklight. My first boss was Seth at YOU in Evanston. Been working in this world. And I will totally agree with you that there are too many nonprofits doing similar things. That was my big learning from my decade in that work. Great things, but similar.
Well, and I would say, with this connection with Seth, I always say that Chicago is a small town masquerading as a big city. You're never far away from figuring out who you know in common.
Totally. Yeah.
Dee, I love that wall hanging behind you. I've been like fixating on it the whole time.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Dee. I might be the outlier. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit here. it's an architecture and urban design nonprofit. And I just really resonated with what you were saying when you were talking about kind of renovating or gutting the organization post COVID. I think a lot of us have been through that. My organization certainly has. And there were a lot of similarities. I think we increased our board, also diversified our board, reduced hierarchical structures in general. Making things more inclusive rather than exclusive. Like I see these really positive trends that are happening organizationally with nimble and adaptable organizations. So I am super interested in that process, having gone through it and I'm still going through it. And I just think it's a really interesting learning journey for all of us as we're trying to not only pivot from COVID, but trying to just be more equitable and justice minded and moving towards, like you were saying, your values. I think that's just what we're all trying to do right now. And I think it's great.
That's wonderful. And Mary?
Sorry, it took me a moment to find my unmute. Hi, I'm Mary Patago. I work at McGraw-Hill. I'm a director of UX for the school business, and I'm based in Ohio, so also not Chicago based, although I get to visit occasionally, which is always awesome.
I didn't know you're in Ohio, Mary. That's fun. I was thinking you're in Chicago. I learned something.
No, I'm in Columbus, or yeah, I'm in Columbus, or Westerville technically, but Columbus is the big label there. So I'm just starting to dip my toe into some organizations, and I've been volunteering with Creative Mornings, which is, you might be familiar, it's a nonprofit, and just trying to find those places, like you were saying, the passion projects of ways to get more involved there, but learning sort of that sort of governance, that sort of leadership, and especially that community-based level of nonprofit groups there, but also here just for inspiration, which never fails to happen. So
that's great. And Ella?
Hello. Sorry, I've been running around trying to get, like, in this office, trying to get things together for South by Southwest next week.
Oh, wow.
Listening in, and I love all the places you guys are from. Some of my favorite places, including Columbus, where I spent a lot of time growing up, and a lot of things that you were talking about. I guess I'm not a very traditional leader in the sense that my work, innovatorscompass.org, is me and a lot of people around the country and beyond that use the 5 questions that Innovators Compass is. It's kind of just taking the heart of leadership practices, reflection practices, design practices, whatever practices, and distilling them kind of all are asking us the same 5 questions. So what happens if we just ask them more often? So I make those available in lots of different ways that are used in schools, in villages, in all kinds of places. My world is a bunch of people who use that stuff but don't necessarily work for me. So I always feel very awkward about things like, I get the invites for chief, and I'm like, I don't know. I used to be a leader at IDEO where I used to work, but not anymore. Like, I don't have any employees or reportees except for all these people that I just, kind of talk to. So I'm very sheepish about joining a lot of those. And I've also been a little bit like unsure what to do about boards. Like, I was just asked to join one, and I did what you said, which is I kind of got into it and went, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm so buried with my own stuff, and they need me to do a lot of really detailed things, and this isn't quite my wheelhouse in terms of my field. So I have been on.
We've all been there, I can tell you. And then Allison.
I don't know if she's there.
Yeah. And
I can tell you about Allison if she's not. Allison, if you're there, feel free to pop on. But yeah, she's based in Denver also. And she was working with us on the Desk Late team a little bit when we had our Denver office going. And Dee Dee and I got to know each other because we were in the same office. So there's the Denver connection there a little bit. And Allison is working in ed tech in Colorado now and got her graduate degree in human-centered design and some engineering stuff in there at CU Boulder. So that's how we met.
Oh, very cool. I've got family in Denver and Boulder, so I'm a little jealous that you are in two of my favorite places. But this is wonderful. I love the experience and perspective that everybody brings to the table this morning. It's really, really wonderful.
Well, thank you, Kate. This has been lovely, and it has been fun to go around and just kind of get to know each other. We don't normally do that on the inspiration hours, and it's inspiring me also that maybe we should do that more often also. So thanks for that. That's good.
Well, this has been absolutely tremendous from my perspective. I've just loved every minute of our time together and getting to know you and learn from you also.
Same. Thank you so much, Kate. And we'll follow up. Sarah will follow up with a few goodies. And yeah, thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay, take care. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was great.